Today, mother died. Or maybe yesterday, I don't know. These are the opening words of one of the most unsettling novels ever written. Not because they describe something horrific, but because of how they're said, with complete indifference. No grief, no emotion, just a statement of fact delivered with the same tone you might use to comment on the weather. Albert Camus published The Stranger in 1942, the same year as The Myth of Sisyphus. And together these works form a complete picture of what it means to live in the absurd. If the essay gives us the philosophy, the novel gives us the life, and that life belongs to Meursault, a man who refuses to pretend, who lives without illusions, and who will be condemned not for what he does, but for what he fails to feel. The Stranger is deceptively simple. The plot is straightforward. Meursault is a French Algerian clerk living in Algiers. His mother dies. He attends her funeral without crying. A few days later, he starts a relationship with Marie, a former co-worker. They go to the beach with his neighbor Raymond. A pimp involved in a dispute with some Arabs. There's a confrontation. Meursault, dazed by the heat and the sun, shoots one of the Arabs 5 times. He's arrested, put on trial, and eventually sentenced to death. That's the story. But what makes this novel revolutionary isn't what happens. It's how Meursault experiences what happens, or rather, how he doesn't experience it. From the very first line, we know something is different about this narrator. A normal person would know whether their mother died today or yesterday. They would care enough to remember, but Meursault doesn't. He received a telegram from the old people's home where she lived. It said, "Mother deceased, funeral tomorrow." Deepest sympathy. And his response is to think about whether he should ask his boss for time off, whether he'll seem like he's trying to get extra days of vacation. At the funeral, he doesn't cry. He sits through the vigil feeling uncomfortable, too hot, tired. He notices details. The screws in the coffin, the colors people are wearing, the heat. But he feels nothing about the death itself. And the other people at the funeral, they notice, they watch him, they judge him because he's not performing grief to the way he's supposed to. This is what makes Meursault so disturbing to readers and eventually to the society that condemns him. He refuses to lie. He refuses to pretend to feel what he doesn't feel. He refuses to perform the emotional rituals that society demands. When his girlfriend Marie asks if he loves her, he says probably not, but it doesn't really matter. When she asks if he wants to marry her, he says sure. If she wants to, it makes no difference to him. When his neighbor Raymond asks if they're friends, Meursault says yes, not because he feels friendship, but because Raymond seems to want him to say yes. He's passive. He drifts through life responding to whatever comes without imposing his own will, his own desires, his own meanings onto events. He lives in pure present tense. No past weighing on him. No future pulling him forward. Just the immediate sensory experience of now. And for a while, this seems almost liberating. Meursault enjoys simple physical pleasures. Swimming in the sea. The sun on his skin. Making love with Marie. Smoking cigarettes. He is fully present to these experiences in a way most people never are. Because most people are always somewhere else. Lost in memory or anticipation, regret or hopey. Meursault has none of that. He's just here, just now, just this, and there's something almost enviable about it. This complete freedom from psychological baggage, from social pretense, from the exhausting work of maintaining a persona. But Camus isn't presenting this as an ideal. He's presenting it as a particular response to the absurd, and one that will ultimately prove fatal. The turning point comes on the beach. Meursault is walking alone, trying to escape the heat. He encounters one of the Arabs from the earlier confrontation. The Arab has a knife, but he doesn't attack. He's just there. And Meursault, blinded by the sun, disoriented by the heat, his head pounding, reaches for the gun in his pocket. He doesn't plan to shoot. He doesn't even particularly want to, but the sun is unbearable. The light reflecting off the knife is unbearable. Everything is too much. And he pulls the trigger. Once, the Arab falls. And then Meursault fires 4 more times into the motionless body. And Camus writes, "I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day. The exceptional silence of a beach where I've been happy. It's an extraordinary sentence. Not I knew I had killed a man. but I knew I had shattered the harmony of the day. Even in this moment, Meursault's consciousness is focused on sensation, on the disruption of peace, not on moral weight. This is where many readers turn against Meursault. How can he be so detached? How can he kill someone and feel more concerned about the disruption of his pleasant afternoon than about the life he has taken? But Camus isn't asking us to admire Meursault. He's asking us to understand what happens when someone lives with complete honesty in an absurd universe. Meursault doesn't believe life has inherent meaning. He doesn't believe in God or moral absolutes or sacred human life. He experiences the world as pure physical sensation and social convention. And in that moment, on the beach, sensation overwhelmed him and he acted. No deep motivation, no psychological explanation, just a trigger pulled because the sun was too bright. The trial is where the stranger reveals its true power. You would think the trial would be about the murder, about whether Meursault acted in self-defense or with premeditation, about the facts of what happened. But it's not. The trial becomes about who Meursault is, about his character, about his soul. The prosecution doesn't focus on the shooting. They focus on the funeral, on the fact that Meursault didn't cry, that he drank coffee and smoked cigarettes during the vigil, that the next day he went swimming and started a relationship, that he went to see a comedy film. They bring in witnesses not from the beach, but from the funeral home. The director testifies about Meursault's indifference, and the prosecutor makes his case. This is a man without morals, without feelings, without a soul. He didn't cry at his mother's funeral, therefore he's capable of any evil. The murder is just confirmation of what his behavior at the funeral already revealed. He's a monster. And Meursault, during all this, remains passive. He barely defends himself. When his lawyer tells him he needs to show remorse, needs to express regret, Meursault says honestly that he feels more annoyance than real regret. The lawyer's horrified. Everyone is horrified. Because Meursault won't play the game. He won't perform repentance. He won't manufacture emotions. He doesn't feel. He continues to tell the truth as he experiences it. And this truth is unforgivable. Society can accept a murderer who cries and begs forgiveness. Society cannot accept someone who refuses to pretend. The verdict is predetermined. Death. But something changes in Meursault during his imprisonment. For the first time in the novel, he begins to think. He begins to reflect on his life. He remembers. He anticipates. The pure present tense consciousness starts to develop depth. And when a chaplain visits him in his cell, trying to get him to accept God, to repent, to find meaning in his suffering, Meursault explodes. It's the only moment of passion in the entire novel. He grabs the chaplain. He shouts. He says he's sure of his life and sure of his death and sure of everything. He doesn't need God's certainty because he has his own. He has lived. That's enough. Nothing matters, and therefore everything matters. Every moment he lived was equal in value. His love for Marie, the sunlight on the sea, even his indifference. All of it was his life, and it was real, and no imagined afterlife can diminish it. This is the moment when Meursault becomes the absurd hero. Not because he killed someone, but because he finally embraces his condition fully and consciously. He accepts that life has no meaning beyond the living of it. He accepts his death. He accepts the universe's indifference. And in that acceptance, he finds a strange peace. Camus ends the novel with one of the most haunting passages in literature. Meursault says that for everything to be consummated, for him to feel less alone. He hopes there will be many spectators at his execution and that they greet him with cries of hate, because he needs to know he's not alone in his solitude, that his condemnation is society's last desperate attempt to impose meaning, to maintain the illusion that some lives are sacred and some acts are unforgivable. He wants to feel their hate because their hate confirms he was right to refuse their lies. So what is Camus showing us with Meursault? Is he a hero or a cautionary tale? The answer is both. Meursault lives with a kind of honesty that most of us can't manage. He refuses the comfortable lies that make social life possible. He won't pretend to grieve when he doesn't. He won't pretend to love when he's indifferent. He won't pretend his actions have cosmic significance when he knows they don't. This honesty is admirable in a way. It's authentic, but it's also incomplete. Meursault's mistake isn't his honesty. It's his passivity. He drifts. He doesn't create meaning even though he's free to. He doesn't revolt. He just accepts. And this acceptance, this pure presentence consciousness without reflection or commitment, leads to violence. Not because he's evil, but because he has no framework for ethical action. He has torn down all the illusions, but hasn't built anything in their place. Camus' point is subtle. Living in the absurd doesn't mean living like Meursault. It doesn't mean indifference. It doesn't mean passivity. It means lucidity. Yes. It means honesty. Yes. But it also means revolt, passion, engagement. The absurd hero that Camus describes in the myth of Sisyphus is conscious of meaninglessness, but chooses to live intensely anyway. Meursault is conscious, but he doesn't choose. He just floats, and that's not enough. That's not life. That's just existence. The tragedy of The Stranger is that Meursault discovers how to live only when he is about to die. Only in his cell, facing execution, does he finally feel something. Finally care. Finally say yes to his life with full consciousness. And by then, it's too late. The novel also shows us something crucial about society, about how we collectively defend ourselves against the absurd. We create rituals, funerals, weddings, trials. These rituals are meant to impose order, to suggest that life has structure and meaning. And we require everyone to participate in these rituals, to perform the appropriate emotions, to maintain the collective illusion. When someone refuses, when someone like Meursault simply opts out, it threatens the entire system. Because if one person can live without these rituals, if one person can be honest about their indifference, then maybe we all could. Maybe we're all just pretending. And that possibility is terrifying. So we punish the honest person. We call them inhuman. We say they have no soul. We execute them. Not because they're dangerous, but because their honesty is dangerous. Their honesty reveals what we're all trying to hide. Think about your own life. How much of what you do is genuine and how much is performance? When you say you're sorry, are you really? When you express love, do you feel it, or are you saying what's expected? When you attend a funeral, are you grieving or are you performing grief? These aren't comfortable questions. Most of us would prefer not to ask them. We'd prefer to live in what Sartre called bad faith, going through the motions, telling the acceptable lies, maintaining the social fiction. But Camus won't let us. Through Meursault, he forces us to look at how much of our emotional life is authentic and how much is just playing a role we've been assigned. And yet, Camus isn't saying we should all become like Meursault. He's not advocating for sociopathy or indifference. What he's showing is the danger of one extreme. Pure honesty without engagement. Pure present tense consciousness without commitment. Meursault represents what happens when you tear away all illusions but don't replace them with chosen values. With passion and engagement, with revolt, he shows us that accepting the absurd is only the first step. The second step, the crucial step, is deciding how to live in full awareness of it. And that requires more than honesty. It requires courage. It requires saying yes to life, not passively, not with indifference, but with full consciousness and full commitment. The Stranger remains shocking because it refuses to comfort us. Meursault never becomes sympathetic in any conventional sense. He never learns a lesson that redeems him. He never transforms into a hero we can admire without reservation. He remains strange to the end, a stranger to society. Yes, but also a stranger to himself until those final moments. And that strangeness is the point. We're all strangers in an absurd universe. We're all pretending we belong here, that we understand what's happening, that our lives make sense. Meursault stops pretending, and society destroys him for it. But in his destruction, he reveals the truth. Not a comfortable truth. Not a truth that makes life easier, but a truth that, if we can face it, might set us free. So here's my question for you. If you stopped performing, stopped pretending, stopped saying what you're supposed to say and feeling what you're supposed to feel, what would be left? Who would you be? Would you be Meursault, drifting in indifference? Or would you be something else? Someone who sees clearly, but still engages, still cares, still creates meaning through the act of living? Because that's the challenge Camus leaves us with. Not to become strangers to ourselves, but to become honest with ourselves while still remaining committed to life. To see the absurd and embrace it without drowning in indifference. To be lucid without being passive. That's the real test. And it's the test we all face, whether we admit it or not. Welcome to The Stranger. Welcome to Camus Speaks.